I think that we've known for some time that there were groups planning this, and I think the American people should know that the men and women in government and all the agencies have worked very hard and very diligently against this. Obviously, we didn't do enough. We didn't either have the tools or the cooperation or somehow get the information that we needed to have prevented it. And you can be sure that those men and women are right now resolved to do more and to be more effective. This is a national challenge, and I'm confident that we'll meet it.
All right, General Wesley Clark joining us now from Little Rock, Arkansas. He is, of course, the former commander of NATO. General Clark saying earlier, in his estimation, there is likely to be more trouble given the coordination and the scale of these devastating attacks this morning, September the 11th, 2001, on New York City and on Washington, D.C., and at least 4 commercial jetliners involved in these different attacks. Patty Davis, our Washington correspondent, here with me in the studio. Patty, you have some information about one of those airliners.
That's right, Judy. Well, United Airlines, as you said earlier, is confirming that its Flight 93, that's a Boeing 757, it was en route from Newark to San Francisco, did crash near Pittsburgh. It is also now saying that it is deeply concerned about another flight, that is United Flight number 175, a Boeing 757 that was traveling from Boston to Los Angeles. It said it is deeply concerned about that flight right now. We don't know the status of that particular flight right now. Now, the United Airlines CEO, James Goodwin, saying that the thoughts of everyone at United are with the passengers and crews of these flights, including prayers. United is not saying how many people on board each of these flights, how many flight attendants, how many pilots. So at this point, that is their statement. They're saying one plane. They are confirming Flight 93 that was from Newark to San Francisco crashed near Pittsburgh. Another flight deeply concerned about United Flight 175, Boston to Los Angeles. That's a Boeing 767. Now, on a typical day, there'd be some 4,000 flights of all different aircraft, including military, general aviation, commercial aircraft in the skies. As we've reported here on CNN, the FAA has issued a ground stop, the first ever on all departing flights in the United States. Also, the flights that crashed into the World Trade Center and also into the Pentagon, we are told by the FAA that that was the most restricted airspace that you can get. That was Class B airspace. It doesn't get any more restricted than that. So there should not have been any flights in the areas where those planes came down.
Patty, let me just ask you, the flight that United Airlines says it is, quote, deeply concerned about, the Boston to Los Angeles flight, are they confident that that is not one of the airliners that has already crashed?
United is not going beyond its statement at this point. They're just simply not saying, Judy. I think they're trying to figure it out as much as anybody else. The FBI involved in this as well, and they're trying to track this.
Because what we're trying to do here is piece together whether there is still a flight out there in the air that there are questions about. And I guess I don't have enough information in front of me right now to identify that. And you're saying the airline is just not giving that right now.
Right. Yeah. They are confirming that the one has crashed, but the other one they are not giving any information at this point. So unfortunately, we can't piece that puzzle together just quite yet.
Patty, I would add, as I'm listening to you and we're watching these pictures from, I believe this is the Pentagon, but I'm not sure. I just turned away. This is the Pentagon. I am told that there are wire reports quoting a senior official with the radical Islamic Jihad movement. Now, again, CNN has not confirmed this. It is the radical Islamic Jihad movement saying the attacks are a consequence of United States policy in the Middle East. And again, this is a wire report. We have not been able to confirm it, but we are simply at this point passing along to you as much information as we have. As we look at these extraordinary pictures, developments, the likes of which I think none of us who are reporting to you today have ever seen, I'm going to turn right now back to my colleague in New York, Aaron Brown. Aaron.
Judy, thank you. As we approach noon, about quarter to noon Eastern Time, it was about 4 hours ago that this all began. About 3 hours ago, thank you. At about quarter to 9 Eastern Time, the first of the planes hit the World Trade Center tower, about 30 blocks or so from where we are. And you can still see now the smoke coming from that building. The first of those planes hit, and then 18 minutes later, and we can show you this one, the second tower was hit. That plane, you see it on the right side of your screen, coming behind the tower, and you will see the flame and the smoke coming from the front as that plane, perhaps a hijacked plane. We have, CNN's been told that an American Airlines flight out of Boston, a 767, was hijacked. And that was about 18 minutes after the first. Then as rescue crews began converging, as people desperately tried to get out of those buildings, some 50,000 people work in the Trade Center towers here in Manhattan. As they were trying to get out, the South Tower collapsed. It collapsed in an enormous plume of smoke and spark. And what we can't tell you is if there was a second explosion or if this collapse was simply a structural collapse caused by the plane that hit it perhaps a half hour before. And then just a few minutes after that, it wasn't very long, as you will see, it happened again. The second tower came tumbling down, and you can see that it almost looks like one of those planned implosions, but of course there was nothing planned. And it was not an implosion, as you see.
That was the first tower collapse that we
there
just saw.
There we go. Here's the second one
This
coming.
is the collapse of the second tower.
And so now as we stand here, both towers, the tops of both towers are gone. Behind somewhere, that plume of smoke that continues to rise over the Trade Center. What is left of those buildings, we cannot tell you. We cannot tell you. In Logan Airport, where at least two, perhaps three of the planes involved began their day, officials now are meeting with reporters, and we can pick that up live.
That we've had various reports on to call these following numbers. American Airlines, 800-245-0999. Secondly, family members can call a Massport number, 617-568-3100. We've also urging people not to come to the airport at this point in time. We've increased the shuttle buses from the terminals to the MBTA Blue Line stop, and the MBTA has increased the frequency of subway transportation. We are in close communication with the FAA, the FBI, State Police, Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And that's all I have right now.
Joe, you've got to tell us. What flights do you have reports on?
The flights, I cannot confirm or deny any flight numbers because I have not received official notification on any flights. They're broadcasting several flight numbers. I believe they're broadcast flight number 11, American Airlines. I don't know.
The situation right now is a massive rescue effort that's going on right now. We're trying to evacuate thousands and thousands of people. We have as many of our police and fire personnel as we have down in the southern part of Manhattan, evacuating people, trying to save as many lives as possible. We've been in communication with Governor Pataki, who's gotten the National Guard ready, and they're going to come in and relieve us a little bit later in the day. And we've spoken to the White House, and the urban search and rescue teams will come here also to assist us. But right now, it's the New York City Police and Fire, EMS, that are down there trying to evacuate as many people as we possibly can. And we've asked everyone to leave Lower Manhattan if they can on their own so that it relieves our efforts. And this will be going on all day. It's a horrible, horrible tragedy.
It is that. Mr. Mayor, can you tell me, are people panicking down there, or
No,
are they
people.
leaving?
I was, I was there right in a building that got hit by the debris when the first tower collapsed. So I had to evacuate with people, and we were trapped in the building for a while. And we finally were able to get out, and we all walked north. And people, everything that I observed, even though it was hundreds, maybe in some cases thousands of people that were walking down the street, they were orderly, they were calm, they handled themselves really probably better than anybody had any right to expect.
And Mr. Mayor, we were told one of the problems, and Lord knows there are hundreds of problems, one of the problems was that a large number of police, fire, EMS personnel have also been injured in this. Can you shed any light on that?
I don't even want to contemplate what the number will be. But when the building collapsed, we had a lot of our police officers and firefighters in the building, and I know many of them because I saw some of them go in because I was there, and I'm praying for them. I just hope they're able to get out.
I think we all are.
The losses to our police department and fire department,
Sir,
are going to be severe.
Do you believe that was there another set of explosions that caused the buildings to collapse, or was it the structural damage caused by the planes?
I don't know. I saw the first collapse and heard the second because I was in a building when the second took place. I think it was structural, but I cannot be sure.
And can you tell us how many hospitals in the city and perhaps outside the city too? All of them.
Right now, at last count, we were utilizing over 50. I think it'll be over 100 by the, and that was as of a half hour ago.
And
we're utilizing all of the hospitals in New York City. We're utilizing the hospitals in Westchester and Rockland, Nassau County, northern New Jersey. And the main thing we have to urge people to do is to be calm and evacuate Lower Manhattan. And as far as the rest of the city is concerned, just to go about their lives as best as possible. I never thought I would see something like this happen. I got there after the first plane hit and before the second, and watching people jump from the top of the World Trade Center is an unbelievable sight.
Mr. Mayor, my colleague Jeff Greenfield is with us also. Jeff?
Mr. Mayor, in terms of, you've already said that you want Lower Manhattan evacuated, you want everybody else to go about their business. Are there specific instructions that you want to communicate right now to police, fire, everybody else?
Well, police and fire are there, and they're there in large numbers, and they are, first of all, trying to get into the rubble and the debris to save as many people as possible. We also have thousands of police officers in Lower Manhattan, and what we want people to do is to leave Lower Manhattan if they can on their own. Just to walk.
Sorry.
Walk. I just talked to Dick Grasso, who runs the stock exchange, and we have a lot of police there. They have 3,000 people there. We're going to walk them out. We're walking them east and then north, which is essentially the way I walked out. I was right below the World Trade Center when it collapsed, and then we walked up to Greenwich Village. People should walk out of Lower Manhattan, get above Canal Street, for safety reasons, but for a second reason. We need people out of there so we can get thousands of ambulances in and out over the course of the next couple hours. And the fewer people we have there, the more lives we're going to be able to save.
Mr. Mayor, are the subways operating?
The subways are operating outside of Manhattan.
Outside of Manhattan?
Outside of Manhattan, the subways are operating. A couple of delays here and there, but in all other four boroughs, the subways are operating. In Manhattan, there are significant delays. We thought we had the Lexington Avenue open, but it is not. I'm just checking right now. The Lexington Avenue is not open. The A train is working, and people will just have to test and see. The best thing to do right now is to walk. The safest and best thing to do is to walk to your destination. Where schools have remained open, and we've worked with the chancellor to try to make certain that the schools will remain open for as long as they have to help parents with the kids that would be coming home, starting at around 1 or 2 o'clock.
Mr. Mayor, as you know better than anyone, and certainly New Yorkers know, but people around the country perhaps do not, this was Election Day here. What is the status of the election?
We canceled it. The governor and I decided about an hour and a half ago that it made no sense to have an election today. We needed all of those police officers who were at the election site, and we need to focus on rescue. So we'll find another day. We'll find another day for the election. The governor and I made that decision about an hour and a half ago.
Mr. Mayor, you're a very focused guy in moments like this. Is it hard, given the magnitude of what's happened here and around the country, to focus on what you have to do and not just be angry?
It's very hard, and it's very hard because I know some of the people that are there. They're personal friends and close friends who are in the building, and I haven't been able to find out if they're safe yet.
Your emergency command center, what some people have called a bunker, was located, was it not, in one of the World Trade Center buildings?
It was located close enough to it so that it was affected by it. It's not in one of the buildings, but it was located right in that area, as is City Hall, the police department, and all of them had to be evacuated. So that area of Manhattan, once I was in a building at the time that we were using as a command center, and we were trapped in the building for a while, for about 20 minutes, not able to get out different exits that were overcome with smoke and debris.
Mr. Mayor, just as a practical question, do hospitals need help? Do they need
hospitals need all of the help they can get. We're getting a great deal of help from the surrounding areas. The governor has mobilized the state in order to make hospitals available to us outside of Manhattan. Any hospital personnel or emergency personnel that want to come in and volunteer, that would be enormously helpful. But the best thing for us to do right now, and we're trying to coordinate, is to move people out of the city to hospitals in surrounding areas, which we're actually doing now. So far, though, our hospital system is we're very fortunate to have a gigantic hospital system.
Do they have enough blood? Do they need blood? Do they need people to come in and help them out?
I'm sure they will. We're getting the National Guard to relieve our people by early to late this afternoon. They're being mobilized now. And 3 urban search and rescue teams are going to come to New York City to help us. And then anyone that wants to volunteer from surrounding areas, volunteer fire departments and others, we're working with them now to do that, to try to relieve our fire department.
It's a horrific day, Mr. Mayor.
There's no possible way to begin to describe it.
No, there is not.
To see what happened there is, of course, it makes you very, very angry. It's almost impossible to describe the level of anger that you have that somebody or someone would do something like this. And
Sir.
All of the good and wonderful people that were affected by this, there's no reason for this, there's no excuse for this. And there's something like this is just something you never thought you would live to see.
I couldn't agree more, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
New York's Mayor Rudy Giuliani on what was to be an election day. The mayor not up for re-election because of term limits, but the election has been postponed. Jeff, I just step back for a second.
Well, that's
you talk about anger. And we stand up here and we look at this, and we've all listened to what's been going on now as we've been on the air for 3 hours or so. And there was a woman that Richard Roth interviewed about a half hour ago who said what I suspect most Americans are feeling right now, and some would like to say and can't, how angry she was, how cowardly this all seemed to her. Quickly, we go back to Washington and Judy Woodruff. Judy?
Aaron, government sources telling CNN that President Bush, who had been in Florida for a 2-day trip and who broke that trip off this morning to head back to Washington, will now not return to Washington. Repeating, President Bush will not return to Washington. We do not know where the president will land or whether where his aircraft will go, Air Force One, but we just are passing along this information just as soon as we have it. Again, as we were talking to former NATO head Wesley Clark, General Wesley Clark, a little while ago, he pointed out that there are contingency plans that the military and the security people have for the president in a situation like this. So we're not going to do any speculating right here about where the president might be going. Joining us now on the telephone, and there is some information we want to share with you about aircraft in the sky that is, we're told, is safe right now. We're told by the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, they're telling us 50 aircraft are safely in the sky right now, all within about 50 miles of their destination. But in the meantime, we want to talk to Utah Republican Senator Orrin Hatch, who's joining us on the telephones. Senator Hatch, are you there?
Yes, I am.
And I know my colleague Wolf Blitzer, who's here with me in the studio in Washington, had also talked with you. Senator, you've been briefed by what authorities?
Well, I'm on both the Judiciary Committee and also the Intelligence Committee, and I've been briefed by the highest levels of the FBI and of the intelligence community. And I just have to say our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims of this terrible tragedy caused by a bunch of cowards. And there's no justification for what these cowards have done to purely innocent Americans, but I do have some information.
Senator Hatch, this is Wolf Blitzer. Tell us, I spoke with you earlier on the telephone, but tell us precisely what you are now being told in these high-level briefings about those who may, and repeat the word may, have been responsible for these attacks.
You're right. They've come to the conclusion that this looks like the signature of Osama bin Laden and that he may be the one behind this. I think most authorities agree that this is something that we doubt seriously if Iran, Iraq, or Libya would try and do, because they know of the massive response that we'd have to bring down on them. But there was no advance notice at all. They had no way of knowing that this was going to happen. It was carefully planned. And what it means is that it seems to me that if that turns out to be true, we're going to have to revitalize Shah Massoud and the other people in Afghanistan who basically are fighting to get rid of this type of terrorism. And I think we're going to have to ask our friends in Pakistan to get, in turn, to be more cooperative than they have in the past. And then we'd have to work with our allies to have an international strategy to combat this type of international jihad against the West.
We're listening to Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah. We also have joining us on the telephone Senator John McCain from his home in Arizona. Senator McCain, I assume you've been talking to authorities as well.
Yes, Judy, and I'm on Capitol Hill in Washington.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yes. The situation is so serious that words don't describe it. I think that it's clear that the organization and magnitude of the attacks required more than a few people to perpetrate it, and it'll take some time to determine who they are and who supported these attacks, but I think we'll find them out, and they will suffer the full measure of our justice. This is obviously an act of war that's been committed on the United States of America.
What do you mean, obviously, an act of war, Senator McCain?
These attacks clearly constitute an act of war. The unwarranted, unprovoked attacks against innocent American citizens is clearly an act of war, and one that requires that kind of national response and international response.
Senator Orrin Hatch, I believe, is also still with us, Senator. And Senator Hatch, you mentioned the bin Laden organization. Former NATO head General Wesley Clark also said to us about an hour ago in an interview that he believes that it's only the bin Laden organization that is capable of carrying out attacks this coordinated and on this massive a scale. What are you basing your information on?
Well, keep in mind, there are nations that also could carry out these attacks, but I don't think would dare do that, knowing that their signature is going to be figured out. We're going to find out who did this, and we're going after the bastards. It's that simple. And I just have to say that both the FBI and our intelligence community believe that this is a bin Laden signature. And I believe it is. I was the first to point out bin Laden to the Clinton administration and said they're going to kill Americans, and we've got to get on top of that. And I think we're going to have to get on top of it, because this is a cowardly bunch who will stop at nothing to, like you say, have a jihad or a war against the United States, and to do it in the most cowardly fashion.
But Senator McCain, I mean, there will be those who are saying the United States was taking all reasonable precautions. We had security at airports, metal detectors, and so forth and so on. How much more is going to have to be done to prevent something like these things from happening again?
Judy, I don't think our lifestyles will be the same for a long time since it was before these attacks, as far as use of transportation, particularly airports, are concerned. There have been warnings about whether our security was good enough and whether the proper measures were being taken. I'm sure that'll all be reviewed. By the way, I have no information as to who caused this, and I hesitate to speculate, but I am confident that the President of the United States will lead us, and we will find out who has carried out these acts. And I think it's a little premature to make that determination until we have the hard facts, but I'm sure that we'll get them. The other aspect of this is that it may highlight over time the need for more human intelligence. We have very good technical intelligence capabilities, satellites, etc., but for many years we haven't had the kind of human intelligence which determines motivations before actions are taken.
I'm going to interrupt you, Senator McCain. These are the first pictures we have in. This is from Somerset County, Pennsylvania. This is where the United Airlines flight, I believe it is 176, went down. I'm sorry, I'm correcting. United Airlines 93. This was a Boeing 757 bound from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. It crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, near the town of Shanksville, south of Pittsburgh. We're told about 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania. It is not known how many passengers or crew were on board, although initial reports indicated no survivors. Again, these are the first pictures we have coming in from WTAJ there in the Pittsburgh area. United Airlines telling us earlier they had lost this flight, and they knew that it had crashed near Pittsburgh. There is a second United Airlines flight, the Boeing 767 flight 175 bound from Boston to Los Angeles has crashed. The airline still telling us at this point that they do not know where. We don't have information on the number of people aboard. It is possible, but not confirmed, that this would have been the second plane to hit the World Trade Center. Now again, 2 United Airlines flights, and in addition to American Airlines flights, the flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles, this was a Boeing 767 with 81 passengers on board, 9 crew members, 2 pilots. This is believed to be one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. All 4 of these planes that we're describing to you now, these flights, all headed to California. The second American Airlines flight 77, this is a Boeing 757, left Dulles Airport near Washington on its way to Los Angeles. It had 58 passengers on board, 4 crew, 2 pilots. This plane unaccounted for. However, a commercial jet was seen crashing into the Pentagon a few hours ago, and it is believed that this could have been the one, but again, not confirmed. So 2 commercial airliners, American Airlines, 2 United Airlines. And I would just add at this point, because to be reassuring to some extent to those of you who are watching, we've been reporting that all flights within the United States have been canceled. There's been a complete hold down on all commercial travel. However, there were planes that were already in the air when these terrible incidents took place this morning. And as of a few moments ago, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, was reporting that there were still 50 aircraft in the skies. Now, some of those may have landed in the last few minutes, but that was the information as of a few minutes ago. All of them were said to be within 50 or so miles of their destination. Now, I'm getting new information in my ear. Now, reporting our congressional correspondent Kate Snow, you're looking at a picture of the Pentagon live. There's still smoke billowing out of our military command center in the United States. As we look at these pictures, I'm going to turn it over right now to our congressional correspondent Kate Snow, who has with her to members of Congress. Kate?
Judy, it's been a bit difficult to get in touch with members of Congress. As we've been reporting, the Capitol has been shut down. You can see it behind me here. You can see that everything's fine there, but it is in a state of lockdown. They've evacuated the Capitol. Joining me here on the roof of a church, I might add, we've managed to get up on the roof here to get a vantage point, is Congressman Curt Weldon, a Republican from Pennsylvania, around the Philadelphia area, not exactly where that video that we just saw, the other end of the state, and also Congressman Ed Schrock from Virginia Beach, from the state of Virginia, also a Republican. You both serve on the Armed Services Committee. In fact, you were in the middle of a briefing. You were about to talk to reporters about the need for more money for our military. Let me start with you, Congressman Weldon. You've been talking to me up here. You've been expressing outrage at all of this. You've been saying this is a failure of the U.S. intelligence system.
It's a failure of our intelligence system. I asked the Sergeant-at-Arms of the Capitol just 45 minutes ago in a meeting with 70 senators and House members, how much advance notice did you have? He said none. There was no intelligence. Our FBI and our CIA are there to intercept raw data. This is a massive operation. And it's a failure that was caused by a lack of resources and by a complacency that set in America over the past 10 years. A complacency that convinced all of us that with the demise of the Soviet Union, there were no more threats. It's a tragedy that it took the loss of thousands of lives to wake this country up and realize that our #1 responsibility is not education, and I'm a teacher, and it's not health care, I'm married to a nurse. It is, in fact, the security and the safety of the American people. And today, our government failed the American people.
Congressman Schrock, how much information have you as a member of Congress been able to get? I know that the members have been milling around here trying to get information. Have you been able to get information?
Not a whole lot. The most information we got was when we went to the U.S. Capitol Police headquarters, and they were piecing together what had happened and trying to feed us as they got that, but nothing substantive. It seems like there's no game plan in operation.
Do the two of you know why you were evacuated from the U.S. Capitol?
Absolutely. I talked to Bill Livengood, the Sergeant-at-Arms in the Capitol, and he said, Kurt, we've been told that a plane is taken off from Reagan, and we think it may be heading toward the Capitol. I mean, they've hit our economic center, the World Trade Center, they hit our Pentagon, they hit our State Department. So the obvious next item you'd like to hit is the U.S. Capitol and perhaps the Supreme Court.
And obviously those are unconfirmed reports that any plane, but there were rumors here for a good 2 hours that there were potentially planes headed this direction.
Now we're in total lockdown, as you said, and members are basically scattered around the city. But we're going to get back to work because we're going to convince these cowards that America doesn't back down, that our government will continue to operate in spite of these terrorist activities.
You said we're at war.
We're at war. We're absolutely at war. This is 21st century war. These are the kinds of activities that we expect from cowards and terrorist groups.
I need to go back to Judy Woodruff now in Washington. Judy.
All right, Kate, thank you. And I want to tell our viewers that we do know now that President Bush has landed near Shreveport, Louisiana, at Barksdale Air Force Base. We're told that he is talking to reporters. There may be a statement from the president, from the White House there on the ground. And one other item here from Washington before I turn it back over to Aaron Brown. In New York, 34 Pentagon victims at least being treated at 3 Washington hospitals. No word on fatalities. Aaron?
Judy, in the area, I guess, of practical information, and we talked to the mayor about this a little bit ago, there is now in New York and in northern New Jersey a critical shortage of blood, a desperate need for blood. We would remind people that giving blood is perfectly safe and on a day like today, absolutely necessary. And so if that's something you can do to help out in the midst of this extraordinary tragedy, you might consider doing that. On the phone with us, James Sanders, who's with Bellevue Hospital, one of the major hospitals here in New York. Mr. Sanders, what can you tell us about the situation there?
Hi, it's Hillary Lane reporting that Mr. Sanders was called back into the command center, but I can fill you in on the briefing that he just gave us. This is the largest emergency and trauma unit in New York City and the second largest emergency unit in the country. They say they are underutilized right now, while the hospitals downtown closer to the Trade Center are absolutely overwhelmed. So they have put out a call to EMS saying, bring people in here. It is an emergency call. What I have seen at this point are some patients staggering and being helped in, nobody in apparently critical condition. The hospital tells us that they've had 65 minor injuries. Those are broken bones, internal injuries, smoke inhalation cases. There have been 10 major...
Hillary, I need to interrupt you.
One person brought in...
Hillary, I need to interrupt you. This is a Taliban spokesman talking now in Kabul, I believe. This is coming to us by video phone from Afghanistan. And I am not hearing, and perhaps you guys are, but I am not hearing him.
We should remind our viewers that Afghanistan was one of the sites that was hit 3 years ago by the United States.
The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan has already explicitly said its standpoint or its position about terrorism.
The terrorism ټول انواع او ډولونه لکه څنګه چې په افغانستان کې هم ورانې پیش کړي دي او دلته موږ همیشه د تروریزم ښکار شوي یو دلته مو غندلي دي او په نړیوال سطح باندې هم د دې غندنه کوو.
We have criticized all forms of criticism as Afghanistan has itself faced and has become the victim of terrorism, and you are now criticizing kind of acts.
Terrorism یو ویرونکې داراچونکې او نفرت پېښونکې لاره ده.
Terrorism is a terrifying and hatred or hateful method.
او دغه پېښه چې سوې ده د بشري پلوه خورا پراخه او لوی ناورین دی.
And this incident is, from the humanitarian point of view, surely a very vast and very terrifying incident.
Any question?
Any question?
Please. Have you received any kind of information, any kind of communication from the United States or any other organization?
The America المتحدة ایالات یا لومړی قانون کوم رابطه درسره شوې ده؟
نه تر اوسه پورې چا کومه رابطه نه ده کړې او اوس تر ټولو مهمه خبره ده چې هغوی په ژغورنه باندې اخته دي کېدای شي چې یوازې هغوی ته د تسلیت پیغامونه تللي وي او دا چې اسلامي امارت سره چا تماس نیولی دا خبره تر اوسه پورې نه شي.
No contact up to now. They might be busy or surely they are busy in the rescue operation. So they need condolence, but up till now, no communication from them.
Does the Taliban categorically condemn these attacks on the United States?
Taliban په مرحله واره توګه په امریکا باندې دغه حملې وکړي.
موږ د توریزم ټول انواع همیشه غندلي د پخوا څخه په دې باره کې پالیسي ښکاره وه.
Our policy was very clear from the very beginning, and we have criticized, and even now we criticize terrorism in all its forms.
Can you rule out any involvement by Osama bin Laden?
Osama bin Laden لاسلود هیڅ قسم ته یا کوم یو قسم ته لاسلودنه تسکري سره راغلي.
تر اوسه پورې چا په هغه باندې رسمي تور هم نه دی لګولی.
No, up till now, no one has blamed or accused him formally.
The Taliban have said that they will maintain Mr. bin Laden without communication, unable to communicate. Can you be convinced at this time that your policy of keeping him without communication has been effective in recent months?
طالبان ژمنه کړې وه چې اسامه بن لادن سره به هر قسم ته اتصالاتي امکانات بدلون لري کوي. تاسو دا خبره تاییدوئ چې اوس هم هغه پالیسي په دې باندې عملي ده؟
موږ په پالیسۍ کې کوم تغیر نه و راغلی باید.
No change in our policy in this regard.
Do you think the policy is working, Mr. Mutwakiel?
او دا پالیسي کار هم کوي؟ اثر یې کړی دی؟
طبیعي خبره ده.
Suspicions obviously turn to Osama bin Laden. In the media, he's been mentioned as possibly having a hand in this. Are you concerned that Afghanistan could be on the receiving end of recrimination, of reprisals, of respond attacks?
توجه یا ګمان دې ته راوړي مطبوعاتو یا میډیا دې نوم هم اخیستی ده. آیا تاسو داسې توقع کوئ چې افغانستان باندې دې عکس العمل وویني یا د عکس العمل هدف ته وګرځي؟
زه فکر کوم که چا د هغه نوم اخیستی هم یوازې بیا د پخوا څخه چې ټول په هغو تفسیرو کې ډېر نوم راتلی خوله مو خرڅوي.
I think that even if someone has taken his name in the media, it might be just because his name was repeatedly mentioned in the past in the comments. Just for this reason, his name might have been repeated.
Just the second half of the question, though, are you concerned that Afghanistan could receive reprised attacks?
We don't see or foresee any difficulty in this regard because there is no argument or no reason for it.
If it were to happen, if there were to be attacks, what would the implications be of such a situation?
If there were attacks from...
As Jonathan said, if there were to be reprisals against Afghanistan, what would the implications of that be?
It is a little bit earlier to say at this stage, but as we said that we criticize all forms of criticism. So if Afghanistan is attacked, then we can call it state terrorism.
There's also been concerns expressed about Arab mercenary fighters in Afghanistan and allegations that there may be an Arab connection. These acts of terrorism have also been raised. Can you talk to those concerns? Can you rule out any Arab links?
अफगानिस्तान की अरबी अखबार या बाज़ ग्रुपों ने इसलिए वहाँ दुनिया खतर ऐसा सभी ترشيدي لا تلودنا في دي في هم ردوي
ذكر کوم چې دا پیښه ډېره لو پیښه ده او دا به داسې چاپ چې مسؤل چې زړه ته مونږ نه جوړ شي دا کار وکړي دا به کېدای شي چې یو ناانصافي وي یو څوم تخمین باندې.
It is a very big and enormous incident. So just to connect it with some people that even one's logic cannot even accept it. So in my opinion, it might not be a justifying.
Mr. Mitchell, are you surprised that the United States has received this sort of attack?
بأمريكا متحدة الولايات وشديدة حملات هدفه الاتكاس كبيرة من هرانسية.
د دې خبر ده چې د خپل نوې دا پیښه کېدای شي د امریکا په تاریخ کې ډېره لویه پیښه وي د هر چا لپاره طبیعي خبر د حیرانۍ وړ ده.
Naturally, because this might be the only and the unique kind of incident in the history of the United States. So, like anyone is also...
What I'm getting at is do you think the United States has perhaps invited this, given its policy around the world and the growing resentment that some forces feel towards the United States? So what I'm suggesting is that the United States is...
It's a Taliban official in Kabul. The relevance here, of course, is that the United States government has blamed the Afghani government for harboring Osama bin Laden, who may or may not be responsible for the events that have happened here in the country today, and therefore the Taliban response. The president, who was in Sarasota, Florida, when President Bush, when the first attack on the Trade Center took place, issued a statement then. He left Sarasota. He is not going back to the White House, at least not yet, but he has told reporters, quote, "We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Make no mistake," said the president, "the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts." The president said the U.S. military has been put on a high alert status and said he had taken security precautions to ensure the government continues to function. And as we said, the president at this moment is not going back to Washington. He has been taken elsewhere for his own safety. There is no reason, by the way, at this point to believe there are continuing threats, but that doesn't mean there aren't any, and the Secret Service is taking no chances, and we can't recall anything even approaching that. We also have a report coming out of London from the Associated Press that followers of Osama bin Laden had warned 3 weeks ago that they would carry out a huge and unprecedented attack on U.S. interests. That according to a London-based Arab journalist. He adds, they said it would be huge and unprecedented, but did not specify what it was. And we will not assume that this is what it was. But obviously a lot of people are wondering. Joining us on the phone, Richard Holbrooke, former American ambassador to the United Nations, Robert Gates, former head of the CIA, and they join us. Mr. Gates, let me start with you because I suspect that millions of Americans right now are asking, how could something like this happen? How could it happen?
I think we have to start by acknowledging that we've been both fortunate and capable in the past. This is not the first major attack like this that has been planned. Several years ago, there was a plot to bring down 11 American jumbo jets in Asia that the FBI and U.S. intelligence thwarted, and there have been some other major attacks. So I think that when you have a free and open country as we do, we are vulnerable to this sort of thing, and it is the face of this term that people have been talking about for several years of asymmetric warfare, and it is a way of getting at us, the most powerful military nation in the world, in ways in which we're vulnerable.
Sir, we heard, and perhaps it's given our proximity to the events, it's a little bit unseemly, but we heard a member of Congress but a few minutes ago essentially say that the American government failed its people. Is it fair to say that this is a failure, or we just can't know it all?
Well, personally, I believe that for people to start blaming people and organizations at this point is highly premature. I think that we need to find out just exactly how bad this situation is and deal with it. The idea of starting to cast blame within hours of something having happened is in fact unseemly.
And Ambassador Holbrooke, does the United States in a situation like this go it alone, or does it gather the international community together as one, or as much of one as it can, and try and respond in that form?
Well, first of all, let me say that at this moment, we have to find out what happened down there. I used to work in that building and was there when it was attacked a few years ago. I know that area. My assistant has a cousin who's now missing in the building, and my thoughts are first for the enormous, unbelievable loss of life and tragedy that's going on in Lower Manhattan. Beyond that, Aaron, on your question, this requires a unified international response by all the key member states of the world community, including, very importantly, Russia. And as for the interview you just broadcast by the foreign minister from the Taliban, let's be clear on his attempts to disassociate himself from Osama bin Laden. We don't know at this point who did this, but it was well coordinated and done with a degree of skill which exceeds anything. I think Bob Gates will know better than me, but I think, Bob, this is the most skillful, murderous attack ever in terms of coordination. And I want to be very clear on this. Bin Laden himself, as you just suggested, Bin Laden has said that the Taliban leader, Mullah Muhammad Omar, is the true spiritual leader of the Muslim world. He said that Afghanistan is the purified Islamic State equivalent to Mecca and Medina. And in a tape that the New York Times wrote about 2 days ago, he urged Muslims everywhere, and I'm quoting the New York Times, to migrate to Afghanistan to support the Taliban, saying it's their duty to God, and saying there's now finally a Muslim state that destroys falsehoods and does not succumb to the American infidel and is led by the true believer, Mullah Muhammad Omar, and so on and so forth. So what I want to stress here is that any nation, and this goes for the Taliban and their henchmen in Afghanistan, any nation in the world that harbored anyone associated with this must be treated as though they were part of what is effectively an act of war against the United States. And they cannot hide behind the traditional definitions of difficulty. In the past, we've tried to get Osama bin Laden. He's evaded capture. He almost got killed by a bombing.
Up from the Pentagon and National Airport across the Potomac River, usually one of the nation's busiest, of course, now completely shut down as part of the security precautions being taken here. We are told there is a priority on trying to get the president back to the White House, but priority number one is the president's security. And I've spoken to several senior administration officials as well as some security sources who say at this moment they know of no specific additional threats, but of course they were caught so completely off guard this morning, extra precautions being taken because of the scope of these devastating terrorist attacks. Judy?
All right, John King at a location on top of an office building just a few blocks from the White House, as you can see, reporting on the scene there where every federal building in the city of Washington has been evacuated. Joining us now on the telephone, former Georgia United States Senator Sam Nunn. Senator Nunn, are you in Atlanta, New York?
Judy, I'm in Wilmington, Delaware.
All right. Senator, longtime leader of the Senate Armed Services Committee, someone who has followed military affairs in this country for so long. What are you thinking right now?
First, it was certainly a day of hate in terms of what was perpetrated by whoever did this, and second, a day of sorrow for the people who are the victims and their families. And it certainly was a cruel and heartless and monstrous type attack. I think it's very important that we steadfast in this country. We always rise to the occasion and work together when we're in a crisis, and I think this qualifies for mustering the American will to remain calm and collected and determined and firm, but most of all, solidarity here at home with the president, following his lead with the governors, with mayors, with the people on the scene, the front lines, the firemen and the policemen and the medical personnel and the nurses and the doctors, people we take for granted every day, but God bless them, and we need to be with them and behind them and help them in every way we can. Certainly we need to learn lessons from this. We need to find out about the intelligence, find out why we didn't get some notification, whether we had information that we did not properly analyze, or whether
Senator,
all of those things come to mind.
Senator, I want to ask you about that because there has to be many people out there watching who feel betrayed, who want to know why is it that something, how is it that something on this scale could be carried off when they thought the United States was the safest country on the earth?
Judy, I think that's a good question, and I think our intelligence people have to be asked those hard questions, and they will be. I think we also need to put it in perspective, though. We've had efforts against America for the last 20, 25 years, some of them almost of this magnitude in terms of the planning, and they've been warded off by law enforcement and intelligence. So we have to put it in somewhat perspective, and we have to also understand some of our other nations in the world have been under not exactly this kind of attack, but similar type terrorism for a long time, including Great Britain, including Israel and the Middle East, including Germany. So we have to understand that America is an open society, and we're vulnerable to this, and we need to do everything we can to tell the people of the world that we expect them to be solid with us, too, because we need world condemnation here. Certainly when we find out who did it, we need to retaliate, and we need to demand that the world stand solid with us in condemning any country that houses or supports terrorism.
All right, former United States Senator Sam Nunn, Democrat of Georgia, joining us on the telephone, longtime leader of the Senate Armed Services Committee and certainly a leader in U.S. military affairs. Speaking of military leaders, we have now joining us live from Little Rock, Arkansas, former NATO Commander General Wesley Clark. And General Clark, you and I talked a little bit earlier today about what's happened. I know you have sources. Have you learned any more about either, we've obviously been looking at pictures of the horrific evidence of what happened, but have you learned any more about suspicions, information, about what might have been behind this?
Well, actually, I know that there will be a great deal of effort underway to find out who could have contributed to this. And there are various groups who could have been part of it. These groups often change their names, they have interlocking memberships, and so it will take time to run this down. But I think it's clear now, with the hindsight of a few hours, that how well coordinated this attack was, that it was launched from multiple airports, that it picked aircraft that had the largest possible fuel loads to increase their explosive capacity, that the people who were involved knew how to take over aircraft and fly them into the targets. And clearly they had some idea of the symbols of American power that they wanted to strike. And so I think we've got to allow some time for our military to work through this. I am reassured in talking to people inside the Pentagon that the command and control system in there is totally intact. All of the men and women who were part of that command and control system are at their stations and have been throughout this, and so it's very smooth and very effective. I'm thinking about all those people who were in that part of the Pentagon that was struck by the aircraft. We know there are a number of men and women who served there who aren't accounted for, and presumably there are casualties and fatalities there, but the command and control functions are totally intact.
But General Clark, what do you say to Americans, and this is the same version of the question I just put to Senator Nunn, who would say, we thought we lived in the safest country on earth, and now we find out that places that we thought were invulnerable, the Pentagon of all places, one of the most secure locations in Washington, much less in the country, the Twin Towers of the Trade Center, a building that had already come under terrorist attack and had been under increased security, to know that these kinds of places, and we've been told, at least I'm informed that Senator Orrin Hatch has said to some of my colleagues at CNN there was an indication that Camp David may have been a target of the jetliner that crashed in Pennsylvania. This is the sort of thing that makes people want to reevaluate everything.
Well, I've heard the same rumor about Camp David, but we know that for all of our unique power in the world today, the United States is also uniquely vulnerable. We've been targeted for years by a number of these groups, and many people have warned for some time that there's really no ultimate protection against terrorism, and particularly international terrorism. There's no telling how many of these efforts that are similar or perhaps lesser in scale have been broken up by the United States or by our allies, and yet this one has succeeded, and I know there'll be some hard questions asked. But Judy, one thing that comes through very clearly in this is that in an era where global communications are the way they are, and there's movement of people and ideas and communications, that it's not possible to have only one nation deal with the problem of international terrorism. Greater international cooperation and coordination is required, and certainly no state should be supporting and sponsoring the presence inside its borders or the activities out of its borders of international terrorists. And that's one very important message that comes from this terrible tragedy, and I'm sure our government will drive this home very strongly in all of the international fora. I was just on the phone with people in Europe, and as you probably know, NATO headquarters has responded by ordering the evacuation. Of course, by the North Atlantic Charter, an attack on one member of NATO is an attack on all of NATO. And how this will play itself out in coordination with our allies remains to be seen, but here's clearly an area where the United States desperately does need the support of all of our allies, and I'm sure we'll have that support as we deal with the consequences of this tragedy.
General Wesley Clark, a former NATO commander, joining us from Little Rock, Arkansas. General, thank you for joining us once again today.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you.
Aaron in New York City.
Judy, there was something absolutely chilling as General Clark walked through the planning that must have taken place. The planes that were picked, the reasons that those planes were selected is absolutely chilling. CNN's Mike Hanna in our bureau in Israel joins us now. Whenever something like this happens, I guess you look to the Middle East. Mike, what's the situation in Israel now?
Well, Aaron, in an area that has been racked by violence by nearly a year, all have been closely watching events as they've unfolded in the United States.
there has been a blanket condemnation from all leaders in the region of the events that have taken place there, and commiseration about the extensive loss of life that has occurred. However, when news of the events started to filter through in Palestinian areas, there were sporadic incidents of celebration in the streets in the East Jerusalem and in various parts of the West Bank. Palestinians took to the streets in small groups, celebrating what they said was an attack against the United States. The United States, blamed by some Palestinians for its ongoing support, as it is seen, of Israel in this conflict, in this Middle Eastern conflict. However, while some Palestinians were taking to the streets in apparent celebration, one youth was quoted as saying, as he received sweets handed around in celebration, "This is a sweet from Osama bin Laden," he said. However, while this was happening, the Palestinian leadership itself was very quick to condemn the events in the strongest of terms.